through the three seasons. He was very much present during the first and most of the second. But when I think he kind of got himself into a bit of a bind.
For 50 years, Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner were more than co-stars. They were brothers. They shared a trailer for 3 years. They drove to work together every morning. They saved Star Trek from cancellation by standing together. But in 2011, Shatner made one decision that Nimoy could never forgive. When Nimoy sent his final message to Shatner, the words were so harsh that Shatner broke down in public. Today, we're revealing what really happened between two legends. Leonard Nimoy was born on March 26, 1931, right in the middle of the Great Depression. His parents had escaped violent pogroms in Ukraine, hoping for a better life in Boston. But what they found was poverty, discrimination, and a country in crisis. His father worked as a barber, making just $15 a week, while his mother stayed home to care for the family. Their neighborhood was rough, and by the time Leonard was 6, he had already seen families around him evicted from their homes. Nearly half the kids he grew up with would drop out of school. To help make ends meet, he started selling newspapers for 2 cents each, dodging gangs on the street as he ran his route. That early exposure to struggle, and to people being pushed aside, never left him. At 8 years old, something happened. He was cast in a Yiddish version of Hansel and Gretel, performing in a neighborhood theater that barely fit more than a few rows of folding chairs. 50 cents per show felt like a fortune, especially during wartime rationing. But what shook him more were the people he stood next to, Holocaust survivors, newly arrived, whispering horrors backstage that no child should have heard. Nimoy didn't flinch. He soaked it in. By the time he turned 12, he'd already done over 20 shows. And though his voice shook and he stuttered off stage, something magical happened when he was acting. He didn't stumble. He didn't freeze. That stutter vanished completely. When he turned 18, he joined the army. Most people think of soldiers in combat boots and trenches. Nimoy was in Georgia at Fort McPherson, putting on plays for thousands of soldiers. 15 shows in 2 years, including a scandalous version of Guys and Dolls that nearly got him court-martialed. They said it was subversive. He called it a performance. While others trained for battle, he directed propaganda films that quietly sharpened his camera instincts. And behind all that structure, he fought through undiagnosed dyslexia, something he later said actually helped him memorize Spock's lines word for word. When he finally arrived in Hollywood in 1953, the city didn't roll out any red carpets. He had $50 and a borrowed suitcase. He drove taxis 12 hours a day, sold vacuums door to door, 200 units in 1 year, and lived in a motel for $25 a month, eating cold tuna straight from the can. He once said he auditioned for 300 roles and barely landed scraps. It got dark. At one point in 1956, he hinted at thoughts that scared him, ones he only shared years later in his memoir. But he didn't quit. That's what mattered. Bit by bit, the screen opened up. A thief on Dragnet earned him $100. A mind-reading soldier on the Twilight Zone brought him just $750. And a strange foreshadowing of the Spock that hadn't been born yet. He was in Perry Mason, Rawhide, even sharing the screen with a young Clint Eastwood long before either of them became legends. But the roles were shallow. The pay was tiny, and being cast as the foreign villain over and over again started to crack his nerves. By 1963, he was teetering on burnout. But then, the script that would change his life appeared. Just 4 days before Nimoy was born, another boy entered the world in a cold corner of Montreal. William Shatner. His father's clothing business was collapsing under the weight of the Depression, and his mother, a speech teacher, spent hours trying to coax confidence out of him. At 5, he caught measles during an outbreak that killed hundreds of children in the city. He survived, and something about him changed. Fear started to bounce off him like rain. By age 9, he was already on the radio, hosting a kids' show for the CBC, getting paid $1 per episode. You could hear Kirk in his voice even then. He was supposed to be an economist. That's what the scholarship said when he enrolled at McGill in 1949. But the classroom couldn't hold him. He skipped lectures to act in 12 different plays, including a daring Hamlet that nearly got him expelled when word got out that he'd faked sick to be on stage. He graduated with barely passing grades, but by then it didn't matter. He wasn't thinking about banks anymore. Theater cured him of the quiet dread that haunted him as a child. Something he once admitted showed up as bedwetting anxiety. The spotlight turned that off like a switch. He joined Canada's Stratford Festival in 1954, understudying none other than Christopher Plummer. And then it happened. One night, mid-performance, Plummer fell sick. Shatner was rushed on stage. 2,000 people watched as the unknown kid filled the role of Henry V without a stammer. They rose to their feet before he even finished. The next morning, his name wasn't just in the program. It was in the newspapers. That same year, he broke 3 ribs in a car crash and still limped on stage to perform that night. No understudy for him. Not anymore. Then came Broadway. Susie Wong ran for over 500 shows, with Shatner carrying the lead and earning the kind of reviews that had studios circling. He drank 10 cups of coffee a day just to stay focused, hiding what he now believes was undiagnosed ADHD. Sometimes he forgot lines. Sometimes he made them up. And audiences never noticed. He turned that into a signature. Improvising, adapting, never apologizing. He was still grinding through TV appearances when The Twilight Zone gave him something strange. A role as a man terrified by a gremlin on a plane. It was filmed in 110-degree heat, and he almost fainted between takes. But that episode pulled in 10 million viewers, and suddenly Shatner was more than just a stage actor. Hollywood was ready. He wasn't, but he jumped anyway. Back in the Star Trek production room, Gene Roddenberry was sketching out something different. A logical alien who stood in contrast to every human instinct. At first, Spock was supposed to be emotional, a strange Martian who wore his heart too loudly. Then, Roddenberry flipped the script. Spock would be logic, cold, untouchable. That needed someone with depth, someone who could show internal battles without saying much. Nimoy's childhood, his stillness, his need to observe, it all fit. Roddenberry wasn't sure about the ears. NBC hated them. Executives thought Spock looked devilish, even dangerous. They worried religious groups would explode. They wanted them gone. Roddenberry struck a deal with Nimoy. If fans didn't like the ears after 13 episodes, Spock would get ear surgery. Nimoy agreed, but even he was unsure. The ears were made of foam rubber at first, and they took almost 2 hours every day to apply. But over time, they became part of him. The ears stayed. That salute, the Vulcan hand gesture, wasn't in the script. Nimoy brought it with him, borrowed from a Jewish blessing he saw as a child. He remembered the way rabbis raised their hands into that strange split-finger shape, a symbol of the divine. He thought it might fit a Vulcan culture based on tradition and ritual. He was right. One day in 1967, Spock raised his hand and said, "Live long and prosper." And the world never forgot. At the same time, Roddenberry was facing another casting problem. His original captain, Jeffrey Hunter, had walked away after the first pilot. That left a hole, a huge one, and Roddenberry needed someone who could bring weight, fire, and command all at once. He turned to Shatner. He saw Shakespeare in him. He saw Henry V, and Shatner stepped into the role that would make him immortal. In the late 1960s, William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy had a quiet ritual. Almost every morning, they drove to the studio together. They talked about scripts, about what Spock would do in a scene, about the pressure of balancing work and family. It wasn't long after their first job together on The Man from UNCLE that they began riding together like this. Trust grew inside those drives, even though things weren't always easy between them. Over time, they developed their own quiet language while filming. Just a glance, a raised eyebrow, a softly spoken word like fascinating, and they'd understand what the other was thinking. It looked like improv to outsiders, but it was actually something they'd built together since their early collaboration in 1964. Back then, they were just two actors practicing their lines off camera, sometimes joking in Yiddish. That connection grew stronger each season. By 1967, their silent shorthand saved time on set, especially during emotional scenes. As Star Trek grew, both actors started pushing for better scripts. In 1967, they stood side by side when the network wanted simpler stories and less depth for Spock. They said no. One episode they saved was Amok Time, the one where Spock returns to Vulcan. When Nimoy asked for a raise and more creative input, Shatner supported him quietly, even though it meant risking his own paycheck. Together, they pushed for stories that dove deeper into Kirk and Spock's relationship. 22 episodes were changed because of them. Their stubbornness got them labeled as difficult. But without that push, Star Trek might have ended long before its legacy ever began. They spent more time together than most co-stars ever do. For 3 years, they shared a small trailer on set. Inside that space, they talked for hours, over 1,000 of them, about what Kirk and Spock really meant to each other. They weren't just playing roles, they were pulling pieces of themselves into those characters. Shatner's impulsiveness shaped Kirk. Nimoy's inner struggle shaped Spock. Behind the door, Nimoy spoke openly about the drinking problem that followed him from one episode to the next. Shatner helped him keep it hidden. During breaks, they even wrote scenes together, ones that never made it into the show. Some of those scenes explored something fans always wondered about. Was there something unspoken between Kirk and Spock? Something more tender than friendship? Writers eventually adapted some of it in small, quiet ways. It made the connection between them feel real. By the end of 1967, rumors swirled that Star Trek was about to be canceled. Shatner and Nimoy didn't just sit and wait. They teamed up with a fan named B.O. Trimble and helped launch a letter campaign. NBC received 116,000 letters in just a few months, with over 50,000 arriving in February alone. It shocked the network so much they gave the show one more season. Shatner and Nimoy paid for some of the mailings themselves. Nimoy even joined marches. The studio didn't love Spock's ears. They called them satanic. But Shatner and Nimoy stood their ground. And when the show finally did end in 1969, their bond didn't. They kept showing up at fan conventions, sometimes facing crowds of 15,000. They weren't just actors. They were legends and friends. Even when the contracts got ugly, Shatner stayed behind the scenes to help Nimoy. In 1967, Nimoy demanded higher pay and a share of residuals. Shatner talked to producers, defending him. No one expected it. Everyone assumed they were rivals. But Shatner remembered where they started. Two men from different cities, linked by more than just a script. When Nimoy won his demands, it saved the show from falling apart. Years later, when they directed Star Trek movies, Nimoy with the fourth film, Shatner with the fifth, they made sure to have equal footing, even if it stirred new tensions. After the original series ended, both men struggled. Shatner found himself living in a truck by 1973, out of work and out of luck. Nimoy turned to theater, refusing to play any more Spock-like roles. The world saw them as one thing. It was hard to be anything else. In 1977, Nimoy sued Paramount for using his image in ads without asking. He won $100,000. Shatner stood by him again, testifying in court. When the first Star Trek movie came out in 1979, they made sure their deals were equal. But by 1982, Nimoy had grown tired and asked to kill off Spock. They talked a lot that year, helping each other through the weight of it all. They kept going to conventions, kept facing fans together. At some point, it stopped being about fame. It became about survival and friendship. Not everyone who watched the show liked Spock. In 1967, Nimoy received hateful letters. Some said his pointed ears were evil. Others went further, tying his character to real-world hate. Some of those letters were filled with anti-Semitic slurs. They came in by the hundreds each week. Shatner was furious. In interviews, he called the critics ignorant. He even shared his own story, how he'd faced similar hate as a child in Montreal. When one producer suggested they remove Spock's ears, Shatner threatened to quit. That kind of loyalty wasn't performative. It came from years of shared pain, shared struggle, and a deep understanding that went beyond words. When Star Trek finally ended, Nimoy didn't fade away. He stepped into something unexpected. In 2007, he published The Full Body Project, a photography book filled with images of plus-size women from the fat acceptance movement. He wanted to challenge the way the world saw beauty. He'd been taking photos since he was 14, but this was different. The book sold well, some of the original prints going for $25,000. Nimoy used his camera like a mirror, reflecting the truth he felt the world often ignored. But that wasn't the only surprise. In 1987, Nimoy directed Three Men and a Baby. It became the biggest box office hit of the year, earning $240 million worldwide. He worked with big names like Tom Selleck and Ted Danson, and proved he could do more than science fiction. He even made hits out of Star Trek III and I-4, directing both with skill that caught Hollywood's attention. He didn't stop there. In 1975, he wrote, "I Am Not Spock." Fans were furious. They thought he was rejecting the character. But in truth, Nimoy was wrestling with what it meant to be known as someone who wasn't real. 20 years later, he published I Am Spock and admitted the title of the first book was a mistake. But by then, both books had become cult favorites, full of reflections on identity, fame, and where the character ended and the man began. He also found his way back to the stage. He performed in Vincent, a one-man play about Van Gogh that toured widely. He directed and acted in productions from Broadway to regional theaters, returning to a part of himself that existed long before Spock ever did. The applause he received came not from nostalgia, but from raw talent. And then there was his voice. Deep, calm, unmistakable. He narrated over 100 documentaries, hosted In Search Of, and voiced audiobooks and games, including Star Trek Online and Civilization I-4. Some said his narration style helped inspire the ASMR trend years later. Whatever the reason, his voice reached millions. As for Shatner, he proved there was life after Kirk. In the 1980s, he returned to TV with T.J. Hooker, an action-packed police drama that ran for 5 years. At age 51, he did most of his own stunts. Audiences loved it. He earned $50,000 an episode and re-established himself as a leading man. But it was a strange little gig that changed everything. Starting in 1997, Shatner became the face of Priceline. His commercials were over the top, full of singing and comedy. They went viral. By the time it ended, he'd made over $100 million and helped the company reach $10 billion in revenue. It introduced him to a whole new generation. He even stepped into the world of books, co-writing the Tech Wars series with ghostwriter Ron Goulart. What began as a sci-fi novel turned into a full franchise. TV shows, comics, even a video game. The first book sold 500,000 copies. Shatner directed, starred, and shaped the story, pulling from his own ideas. In 1989, he took on another unexpected role, hosting Rescue 911. It wasn't fiction. These were real stories, real emergencies, told through reenactments. The show reached 20 million viewers and ran for 7 years. People said it saved lives by encouraging CPR training. Shatner earned $100,000 per episode and reached homes in 40 countries. And then there was the music. In 1968, he released The Transformed Man, blending Shakespeare and pop songs in spoken word. Critics mocked it. But years later, it was reissued and found its audience. He released more albums, performed live, and earned over $1 million from something that once made people laugh. He turned it into something memorable. When Star Trek ended in 1969, Leonard Nimoy faced a difficult choice. He loved the character of Spock, but he didn't want to be trapped by him. So, in the years that followed, Nimoy became more cautious about how often he appeared in anything related to Star Trek. He didn't want to be known for just one thing. In the early 70s, he still showed up at conventions, sometimes even paying his own way just to thank the fans. But by 1977, he turned down the proposed series Star Trek Phase 2. He wanted to direct, to be part of bigger social issues, to work on scripts that had meaning. In one memorable moment at a New York convention, he told fans how hard he had fought for Spock during the show's final season, even clashing with producers just to protect the character's depth. His decisions kept Spock special, but they also created distance from the franchise that had made him a star. William Shatner, meanwhile, took a different path. While Nimoy pulled back, Shatner leaned in. He embraced the Captain Kirk persona fully, turning it into a career-defining brand. From the early 70s onward, he was everywhere. Conventions, TV shows, interviews, and even product endorsements. By the time the 90s rolled around, his image as Kirk had appeared in almost 80 episodes, more than 20 animated shows, and 7 movies. That legacy helped bring in billions for the franchise. Off-screen, Shatner hosted Rescue 911, wrote a series of sci-fi novels, and even sold his kidney stone in 2005 for $25,000 to raise money for charity. At one point, his old Star Trek tunic sold for over $100,000. Nimoy watched all this from a distance. As Shatner stepped further into the spotlight, the gap between them started to grow. Both men were also frustrated by how little they were being paid compared to what the franchise was earning. By 1995, Star Trek merchandise alone had pulled in more than $2 billion. Yet actors like James Doohan had only been paid around $85,000 for their image rights, even though their contracts promised much more. Eventually, Doohan settled with Paramount for $1 million. Nimoy and Shatner had their own fights with the studio over royalties, with Paramount reportedly taking as much as 10% off the top. The divide between them became more personal. Nimoy stayed picky. Shatner said yes to nearly everything. Fans started to notice. Some saw Shatner as cashing in, while Nimoy was seen as holding the line. Tensions grew stronger when Nimoy started directing. In 1984, he was asked to direct Star Trek III. He was hesitant at first, but the film turned out well, and he returned to direct Star Trek IV 2 years later. These were successes that Shatner envied. He believed his contract promised equal treatment and wanted a turn in the director's chair. But Nimoy had already taken a lead role in shaping the direction of the series, even challenging producers to make sure the scripts met his standards. Shatner eventually directed Star Trek V in 1989, a film that didn't land as well. It became clear to everyone that their working relationship was no longer as smooth as it once had been. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 2011, Shatner began work on a documentary called The Captains. He wanted to explore what it meant to lead a starship, both on screen and off. He interviewed 5 other actors who had played captains in the franchise. He said the project was personal, and he hoped it would help him reconnect with Nimoy. But Nimoy said no. He didn't want to be part of it, and he never explained why. In one scene from the documentary, a voicemail shows him angrily refusing. Some thought it was a joke. It wasn't. The story took a darker turn when Shatner's crew filmed Nimoy at a convention, without permission. The footage, captured in secret, was later included in the final cut. Shatner later said it wasn't meant to hurt anyone, but Nimoy saw it as a betrayal. That one act destroyed everything between them. They never spoke again. Shatner admitted in a book years later that there had been no final argument, just a sudden, permanent silence. Fans couldn't believe it. After decades together, their friendship had ended over one documentary. Shatner didn't give up easily. He tried again and again to fix things. He reached out through friends, sending messages through people they both trusted. But Nimoy didn't respond. Some of the gifts and letters Shatner sent, like rare Vulcan memorabilia, were never acknowledged. One person even claimed Nimoy destroyed some of it. In 2015, with Nimoy's health fading fast, Shatner wrote one final letter begging to meet. Still, there was no reply. He even went public with his pleas. At a convention in 2013, he broke down on stage, asking Nimoy to just answer the phone. He talked about their years together, 79 episodes, 6 movies. He tried to reach Nimoy through his children, through social media, through every path he could think of. Nothing worked. Nimoy had cut him off completely. By then, Nimoy was in steep decline. Though he'd quit smoking decades earlier, COPD had caught up with him. His lungs were failing. He needed oxygen tanks just to get through the day. Despite that, he kept working, filming cameos, showing up at events, taking photos, even narrating documentaries. But slowly, his world became smaller. Public appearances became rare. He stopped answering questions about Shatner. He stayed focused on his health, his family, and his fans. Behind the scenes, Nimoy's family kept the distance in place. They fielded calls, intercepted messages, and eventually told Shatner to stop trying. Adam Nimoy, Leonard's son, later admitted his father had made it clear: no contact. The hurt ran that deep. Shatner's final message came in a letter he sent while Nimoy was dying. In it, he wrote, "I have had a deep love for you, Leonard." He praised him for his integrity, his strength, his sense of justice. He remembered the early days, the fan mail, the interviews, the laughter. But he never knew if Nimoy saw the letter. There was no reply, only silence. Nimoy passed away on February 27, 2015. At the age of 83, Shatner found out from the news. They had shared the spotlight for nearly 50 years. They were born just 4 days apart. And yet, when it ended, there was no phone call, no goodbye. The final chapter of their friendship was never written together. One man tried to fix it, the other chose not to. And between them stood years of shared history, now unreachable, sealed off by hurt, pride, and the painful cost of a single decision that could never be undone.